Nate Diaz just broke the news, and it's not about a comeback fight or another viral moment. It's darker than that. Moments ago, the former UFC star revealed something that's left fans worried for his life and legacy. The Stockton legend, the man who never backed down from anyone, has finally admitted the toll the fight game has taken, not just on his body, but on his mind. What he said tonight has shaken the entire MMA world, and as the truth unfolds, it paints a picture far more disturbing than anyone expected. Stay until the end, because what Nate Diaz revealed might mark the end of the fighter we thought we knew. Subscribe before we go deeper. It happened late last night. No press release, no PR filters, just Nate Diaz sitting in a dimly lit room, phone in hand, eyes hollow. He posted a 2-minute video on Instagram with the caption, "It's time to tell the truth." Within seconds, the clip spread like wildfire. There was no music, no bravado, no smoke-filled Stockton energy, just silence, and a man who looked like he'd finally reached the edge. His voice cracked as he started speaking. "I've been fighting my whole life," he said, "but lately, it feels like the fight's been fighting me back." The words hung heavy, raw, and final. Fans didn't know what they were hearing, a retirement, a confession, or something much darker. As the video played on, Diaz spoke about damage you can't see, about nights where his body wouldn't respond, where he'd wake up drenched in sweat, convinced he was still inside a cage. He mentioned forgetting simple things, faces, places, entire rounds of fights. "I keep hearing the crowd," he said, looking away from the camera, "even when it's quiet." Within minutes, fighters, fans, and reporters were flooding the comments with prayers and disbelief. Some begged him to delete it before the media twisted it. Others said it sounded like a cry for help. But Nate didn't take it down. ESPN broke the story an hour later, calling it the most concerning message of Nate Diaz's career. Former opponents shared the clip in shock. Dana White's office reportedly tried to contact his team, but got no response. A TMZ reporter claimed Nate's brother Nick was seen arriving at his house that night. By morning, the video was gone, deleted without a trace. But the damage was already done. Millions had seen it, and what they witnessed wasn't the usual trash talk or hype. It was something else entirely. The unfiltered truth of a fighter who might be losing his final battle, not inside the octagon, but inside his own mind. Before the fame, before the money, before the blood on canvas, Nate Diaz was just another kid from Stockton, California, a city where toughness wasn't an act, it was survival. Born into poverty, Nate and his older brother Nick grew up in a neighborhood where every day felt like a fight. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and they had the mats at the small Lodi Jiu-Jitsu Academy, where they spent hours training under Cesar Gracie. That gym wasn't just where Nate learned arm bars and triangle chokes. It was where he learned discipline, where he learned that pain was temporary, but quitting was forever. Life in Stockton hardened him. The Diaz brothers would run through streets littered with broken glass and graffiti, chasing each other in hoodies and worn-out sneakers. Food stamps covered what they could, and every fight, even in the gym, felt personal. Nate's friends remember him showing up with black eyes and bloody knuckles before he ever signed a fight contract. He once said, "If you ain't fighting in Stockton, you ain't surviving." To him, combat was normal, not entertainment. It was instinct. When Nick made it to the UFC first, Nate followed the same path with one goal in mind: to prove that Stockton fighters didn't bow to anyone. He entered the Ultimate Fighter house in 2007 like a quiet storm, confident but calm, carrying the chip of 1,000 street fights on his shoulder. He didn't talk much then, but when the cage door closed, everyone paid attention. His relentless pressure, his endurance, his middle finger defiance. It wasn't just a fighting style, it was his upbringing personified. Behind the scenes, teammates said Nate's obsession with winning bordered on obsession with survival. He didn't care about fame. He barely cared about money. When asked what motivated him to fight, he once shrugged and said, "I don't got no plan B. This is all I know." That honesty made fans love him, but it also revealed something darker. Nate never learned to live outside of chaos. From Stockton streets to the bright lights of the UFC, he was always at war. And wars, no matter how noble, always leave scars, even on soldiers who think they're bulletproof. When Nate Diaz finally broke into the UFC spotlight, he didn't arrive like a polished athlete or a media darling. He came swinging like a street fighter with something to prove. His rise wasn't built on highlight reels or sponsorships. It was built on authenticity. Every time he stepped into the cage, fans saw the same raw Stockton kid they'd fallen in love with on The Ultimate Fighter. No fake smiles, no fake handshakes, just a fighter who lived and breathed combat. When he submitted opponents, he didn't just celebrate. He stared straight into the camera, flipped the middle finger, and reminded everyone he was there on his own terms. That rawness made him a cult hero. Fans saw in Nate what the UFC couldn't manufacture, a man who refused to bend. While others followed scripts and PR-friendly interviews, Nate mumbled through post-fight conferences, calling out fake fighters and company men. The UFC wanted champions who smiled on posters. Nate gave them a rebel who cursed into microphones. When they ignored him, he didn't beg, he fought harder. And when the cameras caught him walking through hallways with his hood up, hands wrapped, eyes burning, the audience realized he wasn't playing a role. He was the role. Everything changed after the Conor McGregor fight in 2016. In a sport of precision and hype, Nate brought chaos and won. He choked out McGregor in front of millions, then calmly said, "I'm not surprised, motherfuckers." That single sentence became legend. Overnight, Nate went from underdog to icon, not just for beating McGregor, but for doing it his way. No filters, no apologies. He became the symbol of defiance, of every fighter who'd ever been overlooked or underpaid. But the fame came with cracks. He hated interviews. He distrusted journalists. He refused to play along with UFC politics. When other fighters smiled for cameras, Nate showed up late, scowling, sometimes vaping mid-interview. To fans, it was hilarious. To promoters, infuriating. But beneath it all, something deeper was forming. Nate wasn't just rebelling against the UFC. He was rebelling against the world that tried to tame him. He became the face of anti-establishment MMA, a folk hero for the broken and the forgotten. But with every war, every headline, every cut above his eye, Nate was building a legacy that came at a price. Because to stay that real, to stay that raw, meant he had to keep fighting even when his body begged him to stop. And the fight, as we'd soon learn, was starting to fight back. For Nate Diaz, every fight was personal. He didn't just step into the octagon to compete, he stepped in to survive. But survival comes with scars, and his were starting to show. From his brutal war with Conor McGregor to the blood-soaked battle with Jorge Masvidal and the punishing fight against Leon Edwards, each night in the cage carved a little more out of him. These weren't technical matches. They were street fights under bright lights. The kind that left fans cheering but left Nate broken. The first warning came after the McGregor rematch. He went 5 rounds of non-stop violence, taking hundreds of strikes that would have finished anyone else. Doctors later revealed he had sustained deep facial lacerations, swelling across both eyes, and possible minor concussions. But Nate didn't care. He smiled through the pain, told reporters, "They can't kill me," and disappeared back to Stockton. To him, pain meant he was alive. To doctors, it meant something was dangerously wrong. As the years went on, that warrior mentality began eating away at him. His interviews grew harder to follow. Fans noticed slurred words, vacant stares, long pauses between sentences. Some blamed his marijuana use. Others whispered about early signs of CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a degenerative brain condition that has destroyed countless fighters and boxers. But Nate kept training, sparring with younger, faster athletes who'd grown up idolizing him. They hit him harder, trying to prove themselves, and he refused to wear headgear. "You don't get tough by hiding from punches," he told them. The fight with Masvidal at UFC 244 left a deep scar, both physical and emotional. A doctor stopped the fight due to a gaping cut over Nate's eye, and the crowd erupted in outrage. Nate didn't protest. protest. He just stared through the blood pouring down his face, like a man realizing his body was betraying him. Even after that, he kept fighting, kept bleeding, kept smiling, because Stockton fighters don't quit. But his friends began noticing the toll. Short temper, lost focus, bouts of exhaustion that lasted for days. By the time Nate faced Leon Edwards, the unbreakable fighter finally looked mortal. He took punishment that would have ended another man's career, wobbling on his feet, yet still taunting, still refusing to fall. When he tagged Leon in the final minute, fans saw the old spark. But backstage, Nate was seen slumped in a chair, silent, shaking his head. He wasn't there, one cornerman later said. He left something in that cage. Those wars made him a legend, but they also stripped pieces of him away, fight after fight, until what remained wasn't just a warrior. It was a man slowly unraveling from the inside. After 2 decades of fighting under someone else's rules, Nate Diaz finally snapped. He'd made the UFC millions, headlined pay-per-views, and built a cult following, yet he still felt used, underpaid, and forgotten. When he walked out of his final UFC contract in 2022, he didn't do it quietly. He did it like a man declaring war. "I've been locked in this cage long enough," he told reporters after his last fight. "Now, I'm doing me." It sounded like freedom, but what followed was something far darker. Nate's rebellion was raw and public. He refused to bow to the promotion machine, choosing to fight wherever and however he wanted. He started his own combat sports organization, trained out of Stockton again, and entered the boxing world to face Jake Paul, a move many saw as desperate, others as genius. But fans watching closely noticed something different. Nate wasn't his usual confident self. His interviews were scattered, his words slower, his movements heavier. He laughed off questions about health and claimed he was just high. But people around him whispered otherwise. The scars were catching up. When the Jake Paul fight came, the hype overshadowed the worry. Cameras captured Nate training late at night, sparring endlessly, sweating through hoodies like the old Stockton Savage. But behind the scenes, coaches said his stamina was dipping. He'd forget instructions mid-round, then suddenly snap back like nothing happened. He'd zone out, one sparring partner revealed, like his mind went somewhere else for a few seconds. It scared them, but you can't scare Nate Diaz. He fought Jake Paul with that same unbreakable spirit, eating punches most men would have quit from. But his timing and reflexes weren't the same. He wasn't Stockton's soldier anymore. He was a ghost of one. After the loss, his team begged him to rest. He didn't. Instead, Nate doubled down on his independence. He started posting cryptic videos, walking through Stockton's empty streets, mumbling about real fights and fake people. He seemed more paranoid, more detached. Fans thought it was just his attitude, the trademark Diaz edge. But those who knew him best said it wasn't swagger anymore. It was exhaustion. The rebellion that once made him a hero was now eating him alive. Nate wasn't just fighting promoters anymore. He was fighting reality itself. And every public appearance, every slurred sentence, every vacant stare made one thing clear. The war outside the cage had finally become more dangerous than any he'd ever fought inside it. It began as just another viral clip, shaky cell phone footage uploaded to Twitter late one night. The caption read, "Nate Diaz Wilden again." But what people saw wasn't wild or funny. It was heartbreaking. The video, taken outside a small gym in Stockton, showed Nate pacing in circles, muttering under his breath, fists clenching and unclenching as if shadowboxing ghosts. His eyes looked vacant, his voice slurred. Someone off camera called his name, and Nate turned, but his expression didn't register recognition. He looked lost, like a man stuck between worlds. The video spread across social media in hours. TMZ picked it up. ESPN replayed it with muted concern. And suddenly, the same people who once laughed at Nate's trash talk were asking if something was seriously wrong. He appeared gaunt, exhausted, and confused. Even worse, witnesses said the clip didn't capture the full story. According to those present, Nate had been training alone for nearly 6 hours straight, long after everyone else left the gym. When staff tried to escort him out, he reportedly said, "I can't leave until the voices stop." Within days, more videos surfaced. One showed Nate stumbling during a small boxing exhibition, his corner yelling for him to stop. Another caught him at an autograph signing, staring blankly into space as a fan tried to hand him a glove. The clips painted a disturbing picture, not of rebellion, not of toughness, but of deterioration. Medical professionals began weighing in online. Former UFC Dr. Jeff Davidson called it classic post-concussive behavior. Others mentioned CTE, the same disease that took the lives of NFL legends and old fighters who ignored the warning signs. Still, Nate's camp stayed silent. His brother Nick refused interview. His gym shut down for repairs, but insiders whispered that Nate had been suffering from intense headaches, mood swings, and blackouts. He'd lash out during training, then break down in tears afterward. In one alarming report, a training partner claimed Nate forgot where he was mid-sparring, asking, "What round are we in?" even though it was just a light warm-up. The videos were supposed to make people laugh. Instead, they left fans in silence. This wasn't the loud, unbreakable Stockton warrior they knew. It was someone trapped in his own mind, fighting a battle no one could see. And as the footage spread, so did one terrifying question. Were we watching Nate Diaz lose himself in real time? Then, just when fans thought the silence would never break, Nate Diaz reappeared, not in a press conference, not in a fight announcement, but in a quiet 10-minute live stream that stunned the entire combat sports world. He sat alone in what looked like his garage gym, the dim overhead light flickering. His voice was low, rasped, and tired, the kind of tone you only hear from someone who's been through too many wars. "I ain't hiding no more," he said. "I gotta say it before it gets worse." What followed wasn't an outburst or a rant, it was a confession. Nate admitted he'd been losing time, days that vanished from memory, names he couldn't remember. He described waking up in his car, parked outside his old high school gym, with no idea how he got there. He talked about rage, flashes of anger that scared even him. "Sometimes I wake up and feel like I already fought somebody," he muttered. "Then I see the bruises, and I don't even know who did it." His words sent chills across the internet. The man who built his career on toughness was breaking, not from punches, but from the echo they left behind. He confessed that doctors had warned him years ago. MRI scans showed trauma, fluid buildup, and early cognitive symptoms. He'd brushed it off, saying he didn't care as long as he could still fight, but the symptoms only got worse. Nate admitted he'd been seeing things, flashes of the octagon when he closed his eyes, crowds chanting when there was silence. "I still hear 'em," he whispered, even when nobody's there. By the 5-minute mark, his tone shifted from tough to tragic. He said he wasn't afraid of dying, but he was terrified of forgetting. "I don't want to lose who I am before I go," he said, looking directly into the camera. "That's the real fight now." Then, as if realizing how heavy his words had become, Nate wiped his face, nodded once, and ended the stream without saying goodbye. Within minutes, clips flooded Twitter, Instagram, and every MMA forum online. The internet wasn't laughing anymore. Fighters like Tony Ferguson and Dustin Poirier reposted the video with prayer emojis. Even Conor McGregor, the man who once called Nate punch drunk, tweeted one word: respect. In that single confession, Nate Diaz did what few fighters ever have. He stripped away the legend, the bravado, the Stockton toughness, and showed the world the price of being unbreakable. The truth wasn't that Nate had lost his edge. The truth was that his edge had cut too deep. The moment Nate's confession ended, the entire MMA world froze. Fighters who had once stood across the cage from him suddenly went quiet. No one mocked, no one doubted. The clip spread across every platform, from ESPN to underground fight forums. And for the first time in his career, Nate Diaz wasn't trending for a brawl or a call-out. He was trending because people were scared for him. The man who built his legacy on defiance had finally shown fear, and it shook the sport to its core. Within hours, messages poured in from across the fight world. Georges St-Pierre posted, "A true warrior, even when he admits the war inside." Joe Rogan dedicated an entire podcast episode to Nate's mental health, calling his confession one of the bravest things a fighter's ever done. Even Dana White, usually silent on fighter injuries, released a careful statement. "Nate Diaz has given everything to this sport. I hope he takes the time to focus on himself and his family." But the words sounded hollow, like too little, too late. Fans flooded his page with thousands of messages, old fight clips, tributes, and heartbreak. They wrote about how Nate inspired them to keep going through hard times, how his stubbornness made them feel strong. Now, that same stubbornness was being seen in a new light, as something that may have destroyed him. Some fans begged him to seek treatment, others refused to believe what they'd heard, clinging to the image of Stockton's indestructible warrior. But deep down, everyone knew the pain in his voice wasn't acting. Former fighters started speaking out about CTE, about the price of entertainment. A viral thread read, "You all cheered when he bled. Now you're watching him fade." That line hit hard, because in that moment, the community realized Nate Diaz wasn't just a cautionary tale. He was the reflection of every fighter who gave too much of themselves for the crowd. As the dust settled, one thing became painfully clear. Nate's story wasn't over, but the fighter fans once knew might never return. And for the first time in his career, the world wasn't waiting for his next fight. They were praying it would never happen.